So this is our it's April, right? It's April. This is our April think tank call, the Grow Minimum call, and we got leaders all over the place that are here. So hopefully the next 60 minutes will be pretty helpful to you. And we're going to tackle something that everybody has had on their radar for sure. One of the things that happens with these calls is our team talks a lot about what are you hearing, what's going on, what are people saying, what are the greatest challenges, where are the greatest wins. And so today's call, we're gonna walk through staffing challenges and staffing resources and all of those things with the reality that we understand that 60 minutes is not going to solve all of those problems. But as with every one of these calls, we want to give you a little bit of content, a little bit of conversation, and then some tools that we're going to give you that you can take away. So this call is being recorded. That will go out sometime later today or early tomorrow. And also, any of the stuff that we're sharing via the screen and the deck that Kay's going to be sharing here in a moment will also be in your inbox. So hopefully these are things that can be helpful. We recognize that all of you are in Easter mode right now with about 10 days to go. We get that, but we felt like it's cool to take a break from all of that. At this point, anything we would share with you would just frustrate you because it would be too late for you to execute anyway. So we'll save you that pain of going, dang, we should have done that. And we'll just assume that you're so ready and your team's so ready and it's going to be fantastic. And we will pray for all of our Easters as we're leading or we're attending and being part of churches. We'll do that at the close of our call here in a minute. All right. So, Kay, if you want to share the screen, I'll kind of tee us up and then I'll let you rock and roll and take it away. Hey guys, with any of this and potentially today, let's make sure that we do our best to keep the call interactive. Obviously, we have stuff to share with you guys, but at the same time, and Brandon and some of our team in the is in the chat for you, but at the same time, we'll give some breaks and some moments for you to actually share a little bit, or if there's things that are helpful for you to be a part of that. As we do every time when we're on here, we just love to do it. We make sure that you guys know about our live conference that's coming up in October. And so the dates are there, the October the 15th through the 17th. We're doing some new stuff with it this year. We're going to have that registration post Easter that'll come out. And so October 15th to 17th is that Think Tank Live. And so I think, Kay, is there a slide? I think there's a slide. But those dates you can save and be part of that here in Vegas. Again, May 1st, we'll roll that out. And you guys can bring your executive teams and bring yourself to that. All right. So here's where we're going today. This is going to be one of those days that it's going to be really important for us to kind of hit both angles on this tension of working on it and working in it. Part of what we try to do with these calls, because we know that the reality is most of us probably left to ourselves will lean to the in it. And so part of our objective, even as we network together, is to give you some on it pause. So at least for the next hour, whatever you're going back to or whatever you're coming out of before this call, hopefully we'll lift you up a little bit. So I'm going to throw it to Kay. Kay, take it away, bud.
Um, yeah, when we were talking about what to talk about this month, the common occurrence that we hear over and over from churches that we work with, but also even other churches and with part of our network, is staffing, staffing, staffing. And there's all different kinds of challenges around that. And so we'll be able to identify and pinpoint some of those things to be able to talk about it. So we're going to segment this and we're going to have four different portions. We'll go fast in these things. We can pause and ask any questions around that. But staff cycle, staff right sizing, staff evaluation, and staff alignment accountability. So with that, when we think about staffing, this is not rocket science, but basically we put it in basically a cycle to be able to say, in staffing, there's the breadth of hiring, onboarding, then them contributing, then us assessing and then developing that staff. Okay, so there's the cycle. This is not rocket science. You guys do this whether intentionally, unintentionally, whether with a plan or without a plan. So let's just break this down just for a little bit. When we talk about the hiring part, um, do we have intentionality around that? Do we have a system or structure or framework for interviewing? What do we look for in an interviewing process or in a hiring process? What does that look like? That's the things under hiring. Maybe we're in the midst of hiring right now. How many of you are looking currently right now for staff and are hiring right now? Okay, wow, more
Everybody,
than half of you.
everybody.
So you're definitely in that season right now. And so whether you have candidates, how do I get candidates? How do we be attractive to that? Anybody looking for a kids pastor, that's really hard to find. Like, so it's a challenging thing. So having a strategic, intentional system structure, clarity around what the hiring process is. Then the onboarding process. And so onboarding, what we're talking about is that first 90 days. How we look at it is basically there's a part in the beginning of somebody being onboarded where they're actually consuming more from the organization than contributing to the organization. Let me say that again. They are consuming because they're downloading context, culture, what's the job, how do I, they're consuming more than they are contributing. The goal is for them to actually get and cross that line of consuming to contributing to the organization. And so the best way to do that is to have a good system structure, intentionality around onboarding to be
Hey,
able
what do you think
to
is
do
the
that.
reality with size of church that you're from your experience with onboarding? Like, do larger churches do this better than smaller, or do smaller churches just do it organically and largest churches have a structure? What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you think about it, the larger the church, the more onboarding you're doing, and so it becomes more systematized. You have to have, people that's really, doing the certain parts of the onboarding process. At the same time, just because you're large and just because you're doing it more often than others doesn't mean you're doing it better than any others. So just to caveat that. But the other part of that is that maybe you're a smaller context, and maybe you're kind of reinventing the wheel every year or two that you have to hire staff, or it happens in bunches. You don't hire and everything's good, no turnover. And then all of a sudden we have to hire and then we have to figure things out. So all that to say, it's like, whether you're a small context or a large context, whether you have a lot of turnover or adding new team members, to be able to put some things and intentionally around that. Okay, contributing is what we're using the language working in it and working on it. And we do believe that every staff member should have a good balance between the two. Now, there's certain roles will have more weighted towards the on it than the in it, or certain roles might have more weighted towards the in it than the on it. But we should all be doing both. In fact, we've talked about it here. It's just like, okay, if we're just hiring our best volunteers to do the work, the in it work, then actually we should be equipping the volunteers to continue to do that, and the staff should actually be getting them to do the work of the of ministry. So that's the contributing part, and consuming more in the onboarding part, going towards the contributing to the organization. Then the fourth part is the assessing. How do we assess that? What's the evaluation culture? What's the feedback loop that we've created? What's the reviews, 360 reviews, annual reviews, performance reviews, quarterly reviews? What is that system that you have put in together? Self-evaluation to direct supervisor reporting and reviews. And then the developing part, which the two things that we've parsed out there is performance and potential. Because we can develop them with what they're currently doing right now, with how they're doing. Let's say, for example, there's a performance gap in somebody that basically it's like, okay, they're not performing up to par. We need to coach them and develop them towards that. But also potential, like, can we see them in a different role? Is there upward movement in the organization that they can see? So there's that developing aspect of
Isn't
things
there an
too.
interesting dynamic here, Kay, as we move through this entirely, is just watching the chat and just so many teams with actually reasonable size FTEs, based on that. But the reality of, and this is true of many things that we end up doing in leadership, the last 5 minutes of what you're discussing is not what we typically lean into as we're trained to do ministry. This is not the theological training that we get, and yet we wake up one day and we're looking around a conference room or a conference table at 3, 4 to 20 people that we're supposed to lead and hire. And probably most of the guys on the call and gals on the call don't have someone assigned to doing this, right? So we're juggling the responsibilities of that. It's a pretty big deal, guys.
Yeah, that's great. So obviously, intuitively, you look at this and you're like, the more we develop, the more we can actually skip the hiring process and go to basically the onboarding process. Because basically, when development is prioritized, then we hire our best people, or we raise them up to be able to be the next people. So five goes to two, but that doesn't fully tell the full story of everything either. We understand and get that, but the ideal is that if we're doing well in all of these things, then that's where staffing becomes less of a challenge than more of a challenge. So the thing that we wanted to do to be able to parse out these five phases of the staff cycle is to be able to say, where is your area of strength and where is your area of weakness? Or another way to say that is that if you were to force rank these five by intentionality. How intentional are you with hiring? How intentional are you with onboarding? How intentional are you with contributing? And if you do this, what would you do that? We would love for you to actually put that in the chat, because force ranking, what it does is it actually exposes, basically, it's like, oh, no, no, we're actually good in all of these things. Well, what's the area that we need the most work, let's say, for example, or we need more intentionality around? And then you can actually identify that and tackle that, right? So go ahead and start putting that in the chat of
Yeah, they're putting them in there now.
where you think you're at. So of that. So 4-1. So basically, the lowest slat would be onboarding, lowest slat hiring, lowest slat developing. I see repeats of that. Lowest slat assessing.
Becker said Becker said on here as well, I wonder how our teams would rank this versus how we rank them.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's actually great too. And we might think that we're good at onboarding, but then let's actually ask the person who was onboarded, like recently, like what is that like, right? So that's a great point too. Um, Awesome. So, as you continue to do that, we would love for everybody to engage and just put in and I know you might have to think about it, but the force ranking does really help us to be able to say, what is our lowest lat and what do we need to potentially address? So, all that's to say, when you're saying and we're hearing, hey, we've got staff issues or we've got staff challenges, what specifically in this cycle are you experiencing frustrations around, and can the other parts of the cycle actually help you?
Mm.
So the better onboarding we do, maybe the better contribution we get, or maybe the better assessing and feedback culture, the better development we get, or maybe the better development we get, actually it helps us to actually onboard them to new responsibilities. So they're all connected and tied, and that's why to be able to address and find out where we're at is pretty helpful. Lee?
Numbers are still flowing in. It's interesting, you guys, there's not a lot of ones at the top, and yet it felt like a lot of you guys were looking to hire when the random hands went up. So that's interesting that it's not the strongest. Got it. Okay, cool. All right. Okay, we're gonna keep moving. There it is. So Kay's going to mute, but I'm not going to allow him to mute for very long because he's going to leave me out here on an island. And so he can catch his breath. But I'm going to walk us through some of these right sizing staffing as you continue to force rank there. And then some of our guys are going to grab it. I don't know if Derek or somebody can grab it and kind of see if they can figure out where we are as far as strong. But we wanted to give you some of these right sizing ratios you guys are probably familiar with, but it might be worth having another conversation to think about. Brandon had asked in the chat about size of staff, and many of you, and there's a stretch across a big spectrum here. But here's the three buckets that we always really encourage churches to consider, and it really is a combination of these three. Sometimes we can be guilty of just looking at one and thinking we're right sized. That's a word that Kay uses all the time. And I think it's the right word because it's not just a metric or a ratio. It's actually a combination of these three buckets that we're presenting to you that would allow you to say we're positioned well to accomplish our mission and to be able to live out our vision. And so here's the three. The right people, the right sizes in the right places is how we say it. Right people, right sizes, right places. Okay. And so when you think about your budget, that's one that you guys are probably very familiar with. But the bucket number one that we want to look at when you look at staffing as you get into budget season or as you're just evaluating is what is the percentage of your annual budget that you are spending currently on staffing? And best practice tells us that a church would not want to be over 55%. That would be heavy. But at the same time, and sometimes we forget this, we want to be careful that we're also not too low on the other part. So in other words, if you're way low and you're like, there are churches that claim, man, we are so lean, and it's like, yeah, and your staff is so burned out, right? So there's also a level where if that percentage is in the 30s, it's probably either that you're too lean on your staff or you're too lean on your payroll potentially. Or there may be some other factors as far as expenses, et cetera, where you may be stretched in other areas that doesn't allow you to expand the staffing budget when it comes that way. Okay.
Yeah, different questions that I've gotten around this is what do you include in that? Yes, any benefits, anything staff related that basically is in regards to personnel, include in that numerator. And then the denominator obviously is your total budget. And then the other question that we get a lot more recently is that, well, our per capita is actually higher than best practices or other parts of the country. And what we say is the percentage is actually percentages. Because your per capita is higher in your area, your giving is going to be higher. That's why we do it off of a percentage, not a dollar amount. So the practice, the best practice around that percentage is no matter if you are in a high income and large per capita area or a small one.
How does actual compensation fit into that, Kay, in your experience?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. This is why these are buckets and dials that we would consider. Because let's say, for example, your staff ratio might be right on, but your staff budget is actually less than best practices. And you might be thinking, well, that might actually be an indication that we might actually do a little bit of a compensation survey to see, okay, are we paying them appropriately? Or it might be the opposite case, too, there as well. That's where payroll sometimes
Yeah, the
comes in.
second bucket after budget, and again, these all work together, is the ratio bucket, right? And Kay in the chat, Brian Gardner was asking a question you might want to respond to chat wise, or you can do it here in just a second. Best practice, 80 to 90, average weekend. Typically, the larger you get, and again, it's typical, every situation is contextually different. So we're trying to give you some real great spots for that to begin with. Typically, the larger the church, um, the larger the church, they can tend to skew a different direction, right? Like sometimes early on, we staff a little bit more towards the 80 mark, right? We want to staff there if we can to promote growth. And then oftentimes the larger we get, the staff can pastor more people because of the scale. But that's not a cut and dry. I think this is just our best practice that we want to give to you. But I remind you, combined with the budgeting as well that Kay mentioned earlier. Anybody want to unmute and just we'll give a pause here because I think the chat is lively. Anybody want to ask a question or get a clarifying comment?
Lee, I'll just because you guys, so for context, Kay and Lee have done a deep dive for Lakeside staffing and our finances. And just for everyone else, this was eye-opening to me where I thought our staff percentages were extremely high, which they are on the higher side. But I learned through the process with Kay and Lee that the way we do our budget, we actually were not accounting for all of our income. And when you, for simple numbers, we were looking at a very conservative budget, not our income. And when you look at your staffing percentages, you have to use apples to apples. And so I thought we were like in the high 60s, but when we re-looked at our actual income and the way to look at budget, we were much lower.
Give a
So
little more context to that, Brian, without sharing all the numbers. Like, what do you mean? Is there hidden dollars that you're like, you've got a slush fund somewhere, or give clarity what you guys should be looking for?
Kay might want to give clarity for me. I'll just give you real numbers. Our budget is $54,000 a week, but we are bringing in $61,000 a week year to date from July to current. So if you look at our staffing percentage off of 61, that is way lower than our staffing based off of 54 because we just chose to do a very conservative budget. And we don't have a savings category in our budget because we assume savings for anything over budget. So from that 54 to 61, that is our savings. But if you put the savings into our budget, that's a bigger budget, which means our payroll is smaller. So I'm just bringing this to you guys because this was like eye-opening for me as I look at what the percentages should be and even what we're aiming towards, because I thought we needed to ditch like $200,000 out of our budget in staffing, and it wasn't even close to that. It was how we were looking at our budget. So
Yeah, so actually, Matt, you just mentioned something. Our external fundraising doesn't go fully into our budget. There was a little bit piece of that piece for Lakeside as well. So, obviously, if you have any questions around specific things for your church, and just reach out to us, we will definitely help you calculate that. But yeah, there's definitely some things to consider. The thing that Brian, I want you to speak later on to the staffing allocation later on too. So go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, I mean, this is again, you guys understand this, but I'm going to say this. One of the ways to lower your percentage is to raise revenue. So there's also the fact of if your staffing is way off. I've actually worked with a couple churches recently that the reason their percentage was off is because they just haven't leaned into generosity. So their overall generosity was not good. And so that was actually reflected in that they were spending too much on staff. And it wasn't their staff ratio was fine, right? It was just that they needed to unleash generosity within their church in order to get that back down, right? Because
Yeah.
options are cut staff or raise more. So be
There
aware.
is somebody on this call that literally they have raised their giving in the last 12 months. It's gone up 25%. And so when we're doing budget right now in this next season, we're actually keeping the staff budget the same because they were at 62%. And actually, the increase of that income, exactly what you said, Lee, brought it more into fair practice of like 52, 53%. And so, and Brian Gardner, you asked a great question around that. Why 45, 55? Where's this number coming from? And it's best practice in understanding outside of our network as well as inside of our network. There's organizations like Unstuck and all those people that basically have put the same percentages around. We see this in financial modeling as well. When people go for lending, that's what they actually look at. So when we went to a church or to find lending for one church, basically it says your ratios are out of practice, and so this will impact your financial picture. But also, it's also part of the bigger budget. If you I think like 4 months ago we did basically a finance thing, and we said budget standards like your mortgage should be about 20 to 28%, your missions should be about 5 to 10%. So those are some and so that lines up with all of those things. Brian, do you have another question or a follow-up on that?
Well, yeah, I guess um, I push back on that a little bit as a best practice. And I say that with cautiousness to say I'm not trying to justify inflating salaries here at White Flag. We actually are in a season where we are below average right now because we just opened a new building a year and a half ago. So we have a huge increase in building expenses. So our ratio looks really good on the surface for people who want to pay attention to that. I'm aware that I have some other nonprofit experience, and so I'm aware that it's a benchmark, especially in the nonprofit world. Where my pushback is if we were to take a cost allocation analysis approach, it would be a whole different ballgame. Meaning, for all of you lead pastors, all of you preachers on this call, your salary is 100% in the category of staff salaries, when in reality, a portion of it should be in your Sunday service category because it is a key component. It might be the largest, most important component of your church programming, right? And so why would we not look at it that way? Well, because that's not what we actually look at it. That we don't do that kind of thing in the church world. And why does it matter? Why am I even asking? Well, because there's people who look at these things, whether they be members or uneducated elders, like new elders or whatever, who start to come in and question those of us in our seats and say, why is this the way that it is when I do a Google search of what it should be, well, best practice is 50%. And so shouldn't that become our benchmark? And I generally want to stay within that benchmark. I just think that as an industry, as a church industry, we should push back on that a little bit because just think of your pastoral staff. What if you were to cost accounting every hospital visit they do, every counseling session they do, every those are the programs of the church, not the staffing of the church.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective, Brian. What we're presenting, is the best practices of basically like all these numbers. It's like the goal is not to say, okay, let's get this perfectly and then everything will be okay. There's a fuller, bigger picture around all these things. I do think though that I would slightly push back a little bit is that if you explain that to the finance and the lending world of things, right, they will argue that. And so what we're trying to do is just kind of bring that perspective of basically what lenders and what we see as best practices.
That's
We
what
can
they're
talk a little bit more
is what
offline
you're
too.
saying. Even as Brian parses it out a little,
Yeah.
they're not going to parse it.
They're going to see that part as ministry and staffing versus like,
Right.
yeah, those type of things. So
And
yeah,
I acknowledge and agree with that. I'm
totally.
not trying to suggest that we should just completely try to convince the banking world and everybody else out there.
Yeah.
But I do think in our individuals, because I mean, we work with the Solomon Foundation, and even the Solomon Foundation, who knows differently than the local bank does, they're still looking at the same kind of benchmark. So I get that there's reality to it, but I do
Yes.
think we should be cautious of how that plays out given the reality of the programming that's attached to the staffing.
Yeah, well taken. This is the last phrase I'll say around that I think will cover what you were saying is that what I would say around all of these things, there's different seasons where you want to intentionally be over or under in some of these categories. And so don't, just say, okay, hey, this is exactly what we're going for. Like there might be a season, like for example, when you're church planting, you're way over these
Yeah,
ratios.
Matt
Why?
Rose, he's a church planner. He's
Okay,
in. He's just going to add staff like crazy because
that's right.
his operational costs are lower. Is that
So
right?
there's a season to this, but there's a right sizing to those seasons as well. And that's what we're talking about. So, all right, keep going, Lee.
That's good because typically we've had some conversations, and again we'll move, but the conversations we have is when guys start looking to banks and financial, how do we expand, how do we build? All of a sudden they start paying closer attention than they were because now somebody else is looking at the numbers. Let's look at the allocation. This is our third bucket, and this is an additional slide that will show kind of across ministry departments, and we want to be a little careful here, but we also have a tool for you. So. And we've actually put church sizes at the top as far as what these typically will look like as a percentage of your entire team. Keeping in mind, this is allocation of team, not allocation of dollars.
Mhm.
It may follow some of that, but I want to be careful. Becker was spinning out of control last week around this, so we had to dial him in. In other words, we recognize that some areas are just going to be more costly than others. So we don't want you to go, I mean, let's just be fair. The guy that plays guitar and sings like amazing is probably going to cost you a little more than the kids person. It probably shouldn't be that way, but that's the reality. So these are FTE allocations that are typical to church size as far as how you're looking to do that. Where this will be helpful is as you grow, you can see where those percentages. Isn't it interesting that at the senior leadership, it actually goes down, and at some of the other ministry places, it actually starts to accelerate? And we have a Google sheet for you guys that we're going to share that will allow you to do this. So this is an awesome sheet that we put together that you're going to get, and then you're going to make a copy unless you want everybody to see your numbers. Okay, so basically, Kay's putting in our average weekend attendance is 500, and then he's filling in. Here's where we are staffed, FTEs, full-time equivalent. And so this typical church now, as he fills that out, has 10.5 full-time equivalent staff for a church of 500, right? So if you scroll down just a little bit, Kay, if you scroll down just a little bit, it shows not only your percentages that ninth of the best practice on the left to the percentage in column D on the right of where you should be, But also down below, the FTE thing will also give you whether you're in an overstaffed position based on best practices or understaffed. So it'll be very interesting for you guys to go in and fill this out and to be able to kind of give yourself a quick glance at where you are on that allocation of things.
Yep, and what you'll see down here also is this is not actually this is actually from Unstuck Church Report. If you guys get that Q 2024, so these percentages came from them, and
Percentage.
we've actually tested that out, and we've actually seen that that's true in our network as well. And so what this does more than anything is actually solves the question, quote unquote, solves the question of, man, we're overstaffed in our ratios, or excuse me, we're understaffed in our, no, we're overstaffed in our ratios, but everybody's saying we're understaffed, right? Like, so has any staff member ever said, okay, hey, I feel like we're understaffed, when the ratios actually say that you're overstaffed, right? Well, maybe the fuller picture is that you're actually might be overstaffed in certain areas of ministry, and you're actually understaffed in other areas of ministry. That's why you're hearing some people say, man, I feel like we're understaffed, because they're not representing the whole church, they're actually representing their workload or their ministry.
And that's where we'll pick on Becker again. We didn't warn him that we were going to pick on him today. But basically, as we've been working through Brian, as he's inherited a lot of team, part of what we had to do is work through not only are you overstaffed, but also where are you overstaffed? Because when he started to dig in and he was doing the work, he realized that yes, we're overstaffed, but there were certain areas in his next gen that were definitely very overstaffed. And so it wasn't just go in. What we're trying to say is if you're overstaffed, it may not be the best strategy, just go in and cut 10% of staff across the board. You need to look at these allocations and say, where are the overstaffed areas? Right. And where are they coming from? On the chat, Matt had asked, and I want to answer this or have some of you guys answer it or some of our team answer it. Matt had asked about, as we're looking for seasons of growth, how are there growth thresholds where it would be appropriate? I think this goes to what you said a moment ago, okay, where we go, yep, we're going to violate some of these best practices for a season in order to break through some barriers. But I would say to that, Matt, I think I would pay attention to this allocation based on here's where we see God taking us. Here's our 1 year focus. Here's where we believe there's ground to be gained. For example, you might get to 12 to 1500 by really leaning into elevating your kids ministry. You may violate best practices in your next gen area because you believe that that's going to drive that next threshold of growth.
Yeah, we just say, like that's actually how we get bloated, though, right? So just keep that in mind, that you do that for a season, but you also then go back to the right sizing of things to be able to, because how many, some of the churches that you've actually gone into and actually have inherited is because, oh, we're just going to do this for a season, right? And then now, overnight and over time, it actually becomes longer than a season. By the way, this word season in ministry is the most mythical thing, right?
Easy.
All right, keep
All
going.
right. Hey, we're going to keep going because we're going to run out of time and I want to make sure we get there. But to those of you on the call or those of you listening, as part of our follow-up email, you're going to get a link to this form. So you don't have to take a screenshot or do any of that. And you'll get a link to this so that it'll take you 5 seconds. But part of why we want to give it to you is it's partly what you can then communicate to your executive team, or if you have a board team or something that you want them to understand how we're reaching these decisions. Okay, Kate, let's go to the next. The world runs. We believe the world runs by a 2x2, you guys. So everything can be explained by a 2x2. And so we're about to introduce probably our 100th 2x2 to you that we love. And so this is not a full-on, deep dive into Working Genius or DISC or Strength Finders. We believe in all those tools. Thinking wavelengths are great. This is a little bit more of like, hey, we just want a quick glance at where our team is. And it also is speaking to one of the questions we've been getting that's difficult to answer, where people are saying, we don't have a staffing problem, we have a work ethic problem. Or we have a where are they working? Where are they spending their time? Right? It's like we have plenty of staff, but they're just not doing anything. And so you can personality test them to death, but maybe this 2x2 might help you at least get a picture of what you're actually, it might help you define what you're actually frustrated with. Okay. So Kay, throw that up there and we can talk a little bit about what that is. Basically, it's the idea of using our terminology around the tension of working in it and working on it, and those needing to be in harmony, not necessarily in balance, because there's seasons where one is more important than the other, but we need them to be in harmony. And asking the question around your staff, are they working on it, or are their strengths working on it or working in it? All right. Okay, I'll let you take this and run with it.
Yeah, so the init work is the day-to-day, the functions, the get it done, the tactical side of things. The on it is more the big picture vision, the strategy to be able to help us get better. So that's the difference between the init and on it that we talk about a lot. And as you can imagine, once again, both of them are important. And so if you have somebody who is high in work in it and high in work on it, they're going to drive because they're going to always work on it, and then they're always following through and making sure it gets done, right? So there's the driver of things. If somebody who is high work in it but low work on it, and you could probably name a lot of names on your staff that is in that category.
Can we unmute?
They
Do that. Just start throwing.
yeah, got it. Yeah, exactly. Is the doer, right? It's the person that's in the day to day, they're on a checklist, they're getting things done, but they're also not thinking about how can this get better, or what tomorrow looks like, or how can I think ahead, or necessarily how does this connect to the bigger picture of things. And so they relegate more towards the doer. And so we really want to see what does it look like to be able to develop them a little bit more in the work on it. There might be other people, like as a dreamer, that maybe is a more visionary and a strategic, but they're really not good at the tactical. Now, we're not saying that everybody has to do the administrative stuff necessarily, but at the same time, you got to do what you say you're going to do, and you got to work in it. Every one of us has to work in it. And so it's not like, okay, I'm going to work on, like my sermon planning, but I'm never going to work in it to be able to get the sermon done. Right. We have, all of us have pieces of that. And so that's the dreamer. And then, of course, the person that's in the low category is we call drifter, unclear, disconnected. They're actually not doing either. And so they either need to be, like coached or reset or offboarded, right? So, but
Can
these
we help you
can be
determine
clarified.
what your future is, right? That's the conversation. We care about your future. How can we help steer you in that direction, right? And this kind of fits in your cycle that you guys saw earlier, right? Of the idea of hiring, onboarding, executing, and now we're looking at how are we actually evaluating what people are doing and where they are. And the evaluation part of staff is just ongoing all the time. But I love this picture because some of you may be frustrated with people because they're not understanding the balance of what you want for working on it or working in it, or their role may require more of the on it than the in it, or vice versa, and they may be mismatched for that in their role. Thoughts? You can unmute if you'd like. Questions, clarifying.
Just one more framework, one more evaluation tool that we can use. I know that we all used a lot of different ones, and so feel free to actually even share, even in the
Yep.
chat, because this is a network to be able to share with among friends. Obviously, another popular one that we see a lot is the 4 C's: character, competence, chemistry, culture. In fact, what we see is people actually hire to the 4 C's, but they don't keep people accountable towards the 4 C's. And why wouldn't we do that? Because if we're hiring to the 4 C's, then we better keep them accountable to the 4 C's. And one way to do that is actually on a quarterly basis or an annual basis, whatever your rhythm might be, to be able to actually look at your staff and be able to say, hey, are they green, yellow, red in each one of these categories? Right. And as you do that, the question is that if someone is red in character, would you have hired them in the first place?
Mm.
If there's any red, you probably wouldn't have hired them. And so why would then you not either develop them up or develop them out? Because we need to keep people accountable to what we people hire them towards. So that's where that cycle comes into play.
Which really fits into the cycle again, the stages, right, Kay? Because if we're not doing the evaluation, then we can't accurately develop them. And if we run that cycle, as Kay said earlier, in a more effective way, as you guys numbered, you stack rank those. If we'll run it better, then in theory, we believe that your hiring will become easier, that people will want to work there, that you'll begin to expand your staff. It may take time. There may be a lot of pushing the boulder up the hill, but that'll be there. And so use these evaluation tools. The last thing we want to talk about is an accountability and alignment framework, because we want to move to this. And this is where we want to talk about one of the frustrations for the last 15 minutes we have is that sometimes we're frustrated as leaders around the production or the performance of our team. At the same time, we don't really have benchmarks for what that looks like. And I'm not even talking about like metric benchmarks, like, man, our student ministry needs to have 50 students. We're talking about a deeper understanding of what that is. And so in our case, we always advocate for what we always push into our network of churches, the church we work with, is really a rock-based, quarterly or trimester-based objectives or goals. So you say, what is a rock? A lot of you on this call have used this illustration, maybe even on stage with a table sitting next to you and a big fish tank or a jar, but it's the same principle. It's the idea of the rocks are the largest, most important thing, both for our organization, that need to be dealt with, that need to be prioritized, that need to happen within our staff. And they need to be the first thing, right? And then the other things go in around them. The problem is if we've not identified the rocks, typically those rocks will not even be on the radar, and we'll just continue to work with the smaller things and the sand and all those things. Then you walk in and go, hey, I've got this big initiative, and there's no room for that in your team or margin. So we define a rock at Grow Minimum as something that must get done, something of vital priority of importance in the next 90, which would be a quarterly way of looking at it. And many of you are doing that. And or we're advocating more and more for a trimester focus, which is 120 days, in order to achieve our 1 year focus. Now we're making an assumption here because our advocacy to you would be every team should be working off of 4 to 6 focuses over the course of a year, over and above the ministry that we're executing in the weekends and the small groups, that we have determined as a team in the next 12 months, these items are of the highest priority for us to move our church forward with impact. And so once we've determined those 1 year focus, we just did this with Refinery next close to where Matt is, then that team is going to go back and they're going to begin to work a trimester basis, January to April, May to August, September to December. They follow ministry seasons to some extent. They're going to begin to work through that, and they're going to begin to put rocks in place. And so, Derek, if you want to talk a little bit about these rocks, Kay, you're probably going to have to fast forward through these a little bit, but talk about how we establish these rocks on both an organizational and an individual level. Wherever you are, Derek, unmute and
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, so to Lee's point, whatever system you guys use, at Grow Menum, we're always advocating for rocks, but I think this plays out the same if you do BHAGs or you're a 40X person who does WIGs or you're a 3x3 staff, whatever it may be, the language we would use for the big initiatives for your church or your organization are these org rocks. These are large goals involving multiple people that move the whole org forward. There's always a little bit of confusion on this. There's one owner, but your big goals always have multiple contributors. So maybe you've done an SMP with us, a strategic momentum process, or you've heard Lee or Kay talk about church on mission. Building out a framework like that is an organizational rock to think through giving and serving and your people's influence in the community. That's an org rock. It's going to involve multiple people, but if you're an executive pastor or a senior pastor on the call, you're probably the owner of that. You always know an org rock because it connects with either your 10-year vision or your 5-year vision that you've set, the view you've painted in your 1 year goal. And then we always advocate that they're SMART goals. And for, I think many of us are familiar with that, so I won't bore it with the framework. Where we're trying to bring clarity, and a lot of the questions we get, Kay, if you don't mind clicking ahead to the individual rocks, is maybe your leadership team or your board is working on all these big picture things, and then you find frustration or tension because your staff or team has no idea what's going on or they're not connected to it. That's the individual goal. Individual rocks are one person's specific contribution towards a goal that moved the organization forward. So that could be, you know, and again, it's not perfect here. There's always going to be a level of collaboration, but we would recommend that we challenge our teams to think through how they individually contribute. So let's say that you're redoing all of your outward facing picture for the community and for the church. Someone's goal is going to be to redo that branding and update the website. So it's that individual contribution, and you see that note on the slide that either connects directly or indirectly as well. Lee K, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think part of where we're getting more and more conviction is, as many of you on the call and many of you will over the next year, either as a lead guy or as a team, start putting this 10 and 3 into place. Unfortunately, what happens is if we're not careful, we cast this big vision, maybe we even get a 1-year focus, but then the reality is the work in it starts to take over, which is the daily stuff. And so even the individual rocks, though they will lean into working in it, they still sit a little bit in that work on it because they're pointed directly at the bigger picture of where we want to eventually go. They're not just sitting in the day-to-day grind of the work that has to get done. Okay.
Yeah, I think where it actually, the direct and indirect language that we use around that is that basically the further down you are in the organization, let's say, they have less direct relationship with, let's say, the full focus of you doing a church planning movement for the next year or whatever it might be. And they're like, okay, well, how does my job fit into that? Well, actually, when you're doing these rocks, it actually indirectly helps us accomplish that. And so there might not be a 1-to-1 ratio, but there definitely is an influence to the organization that's going to help us get there. And so that's why we use that directly or indirectly language.
Joel, you're on the call, and we talked earlier today. So just in 60 seconds, he's in Indiana, and he's been committed to this for a couple years, I think now. And Joel, just talk to the guys that are like, man, I don't know, the grind, da 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 da. Talk about how you work through the grind, and you're starting to see real momentum from it.
Yeah, and like most of these things, you start off excited, you're after it. That first semester, that first quarter, you've got it all mapped out, you're ready to go. People are excited. But if you don't keep it on the front burner, then people forget about it. They go back into just working in it. And so, Lee, you said it, but what having those semester rocks and getting the team rallied around that, it's allowed us to work on it and making sure that we're focused on what's most important instead of just kind of the tyranny of the urgent, the weekly, daily tasks that all of us have to do end up taking up all your time. And so it's been super clarifying to that alignment. We've talked about everybody gets on the same page when you're in the room, and as soon as you leave the room, everybody kind of goes off their same direction, goes off their own way. And so just that alignment and making sure that we're staying focused on what's really going to move us forward to that 1-year picture, that 3-year, it's been huge for our team.
Yeah, I mean, if we could be candid, like we work really hard as an organization, and we're running these plays in our churches as well, all of us that are serving. And it's like frustrating for us to loop back with guys who are like, yeah, we didn't really follow up on that. It's like, yeah, but you're frustrated with your team, but your team has no clarity. So whether you use rocks or not, or some of the other terminology, I think we have to look in the mirror a little bit as executive level leads and XPs around our team. If we're going to evaluate their performance, but we're not actually running the play and being committed to it. So Joel and I were talking this morning. It's like part of your calendaring should be literally putting in your calendar before each trimester ends. We're going to have that 3 to 6 hours of time where we review the previous trimester and we set the rocks for the future one. If you're not even literally putting those practical calendar dates in place, it will not happen. And so, James Clear, right? It's the habits that you begin to put in place will produce the outcomes that you eventually want. And so as we look at staffing as a whole, don't forget, you've got to put these kind of processes in place to help your team actually have the best chance of being successful. And if not, if they're underperforming, you need to be able to have clarity around they're just not. Because we set these rocks, they didn't get done, they're off track, and it gives you clarity as well. Awesome. Anything else? Kay, do you want? Oh, here we go. Derek, clean that up just a little bit.
Yeah. So again, if you're looking for ways to empower your team, this is just a little cheat sheet. You're going to get this whole deck. But if you just need some quick language to equip, maybe you have managers on your team or volunteer teams. That's everything we ran through with a side by side of what it looks like. I think the main thing I would want to highlight for those of us that are trying to figure out how to leak our bigger picture plans to the rest of the team is look at that individual rocks column at number 2. When we get our teams to have their individual goals or rocks, that's what's going to create the accountability. I saw someone put that in the chat, and the connection to the bigger picture, even if it is direct. And so while your organization might be focused on launching all of Church on Mission pipelines by the end of April of next year, someone might have that individual rock to just get that Connect Deeply pipeline going. So this could be a helpful cheat sheet for you or your team to digest, and then just try a couple to start. And then obviously any of us on our Grow Momentum team are happy to help with that.
Right. We kind of are under conviction that over this next year, we're going to lean in deeper with churches on helping them get these rocks set up and rolling and going, because it's easy. Sometimes it's actually easier to cast the bigger vision than it is to actually set what are the reverse engineered first steps that we need to take. All right. So guys, that's a deep fire hose into staffing. And as we wrap up, here's the cycle again. We've tried to cover some. Obviously, you can lean into each of these 5 parts of the cycle and unpack that, right? Around strategic hiring and onboarding. These are all deeper conversations that you can have. But we wanted to tee it up for you, and we're here to help you. And we want both from a resource place or from a follow-up call. So if you're interested in a deep dive, as we leave the call, before you guys all get off the call, we've been setting up some deep dives around this, and so I want to set up 2 today really quickly. If you would like to deep dive into the staff ratioing and the staff where are we with staff ratioing? Are we off or on? And deep dive into that. If you could put in the chat right now, I want a deep dive. I want to be included in the deep dive follow-up around staffing ratios and bucketing and all of that part of it right now before you get off the call. Just indicate in there, include me in the ratio deep dive. If you would like to be included in the rock deep dive, put rock in there. If you want to do both, you can do both. But ratio deep dive, rock deep dive. You got about 2 minutes here to just say, and these are 30-minute follow-up calls that we'll do where we won't necessarily give you more, but where there's a little more dialogue and we can talk a little more about your specific area, where you are and where you might be struggling, and maybe coach you a little bit to those things. So ratio number 1, rock deep dive. How do we set these up? What does that look like? I'm doing rocks, but I'm struggling. I don't understand all those things. We'll give you just a few minutes right now to put that in there, and then we will send out a separate invite in the next 7 days for you to be included in that follow-up Zoom call. Anything you want to add to that, Kay, before we pray out?
Well, the only thing that I want to say about staffing is this, that like a lot of us are, we have staffing challenges. And many times we actually put that on the staff. Okay, if they were only this, if they were only that, if they were only this. And we do that in parenting too, right? Like if they were only, but when we look at the parenting scenario, it's like, okay, how can I be a better parent? And I think this is one way that basically it's like, I think we have more controllability than we think. And this is more when we can put more intentionality to it. What can we own as the top leaders of the organization to be able to make the organization better from staffing is basically how we want to challenge you today.
Great. So that we'll just keep that open as we're gonna just pray out here. I was actually just gonna ask Brandon just to pray us out there at Compass in Dallas. And as we're doing that, again, before we get off here, make sure you include the deep dive that you'd like to be in on the chat, because that's where we'll capture that. Brandon, pray for Easter, pray us out, and then we'll all head out into our day.
God, I pray for every guy that's on this call, and just pray for people who'll be watching this later. We lift them up to you. We pray for our church leaders and staff, and as we head into Easter, we know that the enemy discourages this time of year, and I pray that we'll stay in your word and stay connected to you. God, I pray for our staff and the staffing challenges that each of us has specifically. I pray that you would just bring us the right people, help us to have the right conversations, and God, help us to make bold decisions about where to move people and where to invest and where to not, and help us to reach out for help when we need it. God, I pray you just help us to approach that with a humble way. Be with all of our churches as we approach Easter, as we honor you, celebrate your resurrection. God, help us to just experience the joy of that in our own lives. We ask this in your name. Amen.